Let's go and find our YouTube sistren and brethren. Anybody know for sure the proper word for sistren? The sisterly version of brethren, so to speak. Okay, I think I've got the YouTube link up as well for that chat room. Should be able to see what y'all are saying. Let's try and make this a little bit smaller over here. I'm without the extra monitor here, so I don't have much screen space. All right, let's go to a new game. Actually, let's refresh first so it doesn't do anything funky. Whoa, weird. White one on time. 6 mistakes, 10 million blunders. Ouch. Close that. All right. Now let's make tonight's tournaments. Create. Club Arena. Friday night fights under 1600. $45.30. Start date today. Time 8 o'clock. Create it. Boom. Copy the link and stick it in the bot.
Good night, David.
Good night, partner. And let's make the second one.
Good job. Are you okay?
Hey, Leviathan, how are you doing? Make the 1600 plus group. One day. They're going to need 90 plus 30 for all their deep thought. 8 o'clock. Minimum games 5. Everything's good with you? Nice. Hey, Gabriel, how are you? Put that in the bot as well. Telephone. All right. And from my side, we're off to the races. We got these tournaments created.
Ooh. This looks like this is gonna burn soon, David.
Oh, okay. You could take them out, maybe?
I put them down to 3 minutes, but...
Leviathan, I can certainly take suggestions for next week. Or just the future in general. If you have some, which group do you want to see as 60-30? The higher or the lower group? Ho ho, Drew got an awfully ugly swindle. A win is a win, yes, indeed. Friday night fights appearing here. Okay, perfect. You want the 45 plus 30 group to move up to 60 plus 30. That is perhaps possible and plausible. I would probably want to run like a poll, maybe get a few other people's thoughts. Let me see about closing all this. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, you get down on it. Man, so many windows had ballooned open because I was trying to do a lot of work this week. All right. So let's close that. Copy copy that link and see if anyone's found this tournament. No, that was the wrong one. This one. Under 1,600. Max players 4,000. Hadn't noticed that before. So there are some limits on the arenas. À la brioche. Beautiful. Hey, Far Eastern. Nice. Good to know. We still got 25 minutes or so, folks, before the tournaments kick off. So it's no rush, but we just put the alert up so people can hear. Yeah, it's true. If you and 5,000 friends wanted to have an arena, we'd have to send a private message to someone at chess.com and see if they could arrange it. As it so happens, we've got 5,000 people in the Chess Dojo Club, I'm pretty sure. Like if I go back to my clubs, Chess Dojo, 5,400 people. We couldn't even have just a clean dojo-wide arena. Much less inviting all our other friends. Yeah. Let me kick a question to you. I know this is a small focus group, but you guys are the Johnny on the spots. So you may have good thoughts. The idea has been floated of trying to... Well, the idea has been floated of having some prizes in dojo tournaments. So that could be the Open Classical or the Round Robins or Friday Night Fights or Saturday Rapids, or it could be some, I don't know what tournament it could be, but it could be some tournament. Do you guys have any thoughts on whether it would be good or bad to have prizes in these tournaments? Bonsoir, Elise. I'm going to pull something that I'm baking out of the oven. Verify who they are. Yeah, we can definitely do that, Gabriel. Most dojo tournaments are verified, so to speak. Like people have, like at least, like you might not know the real name of the person you play against, but we at the dojo, like we would know that a real person has put their name down on their entry to us. Why did I withdraw from Golden State? Because I was no longer able to play with the Grandmaster because I'd lost a game and I would have needed to win basically all my games to get a game with the Grandmaster who was there. And so, unable to play the Grandmaster, it became more important to spend time with my kids. It's a delicate balance to ever take time away from the kids. So I came back home instead of making my partner do the whole weekend solo. And it was a 3-day weekend. I came back Saturday and was with the kids Sunday and Monday as well. So that leaves me some more opportunity to maybe zip off to a better tournament another day, another week, another month. Live and fight another day. A swag prize could be cool. And Elise says even $1. So what would be your thoughts about a bigger prize? Like, hundreds of dollars or something. Would that be good or bad? Amazing. I don't understand the scientific reason why you can take a vegetable, basically apply no seasoning, maybe a pinch of salt, roast it, and it comes out super yummy in new ways compared to how it was before you roasted it. That I don't understand at all. Gotcha. Marble. So basically, if you're studying 1 hour per day and seeing no improvement, it depends what level you're at. Like, that's how much you would have to work at my level to more or less tread water. So I work maybe an average of 2 hours a day on chess, and I don't improve because I would have to work like 4 or 5 hours a day to improve at the level I'm at to get better faster than I'm getting worse because I'm constantly losing and forgetting things. If you're rated like 400, then an hour a day should be plenty to improve. Are you 1200, 1800? Where along the way are you? That affects how much work it takes to improve. You're 1500? Yeah, that's my concern, Alex. Let's see. Summoner. Great to see you. Yes, great to see you too. Glad to hear you agree. And let me just clarify, I don't post any shorts. That was just a clip from a dojo talk that someone else in the dojo took and posted as a short. So I prefer longer form discussions, but was outvoted on whether or not we should produce shorts. And I didn't want to annoy and bother Jesse and Kostya and the others more than that, so I let them do what they want with the shorts. It may just be the culture that I was raised with rather than like an eternal human value that's true in all cases, but talking about oneself like that is not my way. Focus better when something's on the line. So it seems like, from what I'm hearing, everybody's saying smaller prizes would be good. Smaller prizes, you wouldn't be worrying about somebody getting into wild cheating antics to run off with $10 or a sweatshirt. But it would be enough to pique your interest and focus, and you would feel sort of just a little more revved up in the tournament. I don't know the concept of Anki marble. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry not to be able to really respond to that. Yeah, sweatshirt could be cool. So marble, at 1 hour a day at a 1500 level, I feel you should be able to make, in theory, you should be able to make progress. It would be somewhat slow. I would say like 4 or 5 hours a week would be the minimum to be making progress for a lot of people. Of course, there are people born with like Gukesh type talent who could improve with less work, and other people who are born with such minimal talent that even with more work they might not improve. But most likely, if you're 1500 and you're studying 1 hour a day or 7 hours a week and you're not making any progress, most likely you're being blocked by some kind of psychological or decision-making error that's getting repeated again and again. Well, a blitz rating is always going to fluctuate, Marble. I mean, even for Jesse, Kostya, or me, a blitz rating is going to go up or down 200 points. Caramelization and the Maillard reaction. Sugars and amino acids react together. There's not a lot of protein though, like in a cauliflower, is there? Summoner? That's so awesome that you know that stuff. This cauliflower, I think of it as not having a lot of protein in it. Probably. Does it have enough to set off a Maillard or Maillard reaction? Filet gefilte fish. The question was, what are people's reactions or thoughts about having prizes on some dojo tournaments? Wow, 600 points higher in blitz, and also that's a massive blitz rating, NM. You're more than 100 points higher rated than I've ever been at my peak. That's truly tremendous. You must have some very specific blitz-related skills in addition to your overall level of chess, which might be at like a 2000-ish level. I don't know what your OTB would be at, but you must have some skills that are very specifically helpful in blitz. Maybe good positional instincts or good mouse skill, maybe 3 or 4 special skills. Yeah, we could easily do prizes that would be things like free training program, free, Chess Dojo book signed by Jesse, free sweatshirts, free lessons, that kind of stuff, yeah. Ay, Evan is a speed demon. Speed demon today. Okay. I'm gonna go maybe post on Twitter that we're having this tournament, because right now I don't really see any participants. So let me go see if I can drum up a player or two. All right, posted it there. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe like a Discord post or something. Sorry, folks. I am briefly... Do we need to bring politics in? You don't have to bring politics in. No, you're allowed to talk about things other than politics if you want to. Okay, I've done everything I've done everything I could do. I don't know what everything I could do would be, but I've sent out some messages. So hopefully some folks will have a chance to turn up. Cauliflower doesn't have as much protein, but it still contains small amounts. Cool. Summoner, your first message tonight was that you were here and looking forward to learning something, but so far, I'm the only one who's learned something from you. Okay, cool, Marble, thank you. Can you play in the tournament if you haven't played many chess.com games? Yes, you can still play in the tournament, Marble. For the under 1600 section, you don't need any games, and for the 1600 plus section, you need to have played 5 games ever in chess.com Rapid. The games of the tournament begin in 8 minutes. Yeah. Why is a 900 and the 1600 plus? I guess they didn't see the right group, or maybe they're really underrated, or maybe they wanted to play 90 plus 30. But if Spear is out there and hears me, do make sure that you're in the section you wanted to play. As there's an under 1600 group that plays 45 minutes plus 30 seconds, and then an over 1600 that plays 90 minutes plus 30-second increment. You're welcome wherever you feel that you would fit best and have the most fun. Somewhere in the upper right of the tournament, there should be a button to get out of it. You're welcome. Hey, Pedro. Bienvenido. All right. Let me make sure that my kid got her dessert and her teeth brushed, and then I'll be back to do the commentary, which begins in about 5 or 6 minutes. All right. For anyone on YouTube who can't find their way into the tournament, maybe this link will help them. Yeah, I'll be right back. Howdy, howdy, howdy. All right. So, 1600 plus group is up to 4 players, and the under 1600 group has got 7 players. So it looks like we will have some tournaments tonight. Cool. All right, I'm looking forward to seeing what our combatants bring this week. I think games start in 2 minutes. If someone is finishing up their dinner, that's fine. You can late join. You can wait a couple minutes and join, and maybe your game will start a little bit after the other folks, but you'll still be able to play. I'm going to try and eat quickly so I can comment in 2 minutes. Well, Gabriel, you'll get paired with the second seed. You only need to play 1 game. And the 3rd and 4th seeds will get paired with each other. My pairing logic that I set is it pairs people with the person closest to them in rating. Although it's set up as an arena, the point is to play 1 game, right? A classical game. That takes a lot from us, right? A lot of time and effort, etc. So it's set up so that it pairs you right away in the first game with the person closest to you in rating of anybody who's here tonight. You play 1 excellent game with them, and then that's it. Then you can talk about it with your opponent, or talk about it in chat with the rest of us, or go to bed and check it and, go over the game another day, however you see fit. How good roasted cauliflower is amazing. Indeed, good luck to everybody. We wish you all the best. Hope everybody enjoys their battles to the maximum. Exactly. Yeah, it's late. Man, that's super late for you to start a game. Particularly good luck to you. Or, I don't wish you luck. I wish you, strength. And endurance. Yeah, the players should just sort of silence things while they're playing. You can either mute the stream or close the stream and then come back when your game's done. If you've got questions, like if something goes wrong, you've got sort of an administrative question, yeah, you can come into chat and ask your administrative question. But you want to avoid like me being on your game and sort of analyzing, some moves for you by accident and you hearing it. And just in general, you don't want to be, you don't want to be distracted while you're playing, if possible. Oh, buckle up, Buttercup. 15 seconds to go. I'm such a talker, I didn't make it through my dinner. Game on. Filet of gefilte fish, yes. I have played some very offbeat openings in tournaments. I played the bird opening, for example, one of your examples. I played the bird opening pretty consistently. For a couple of years at the beginning of my career. But I've also played 1A3. I've played 1 Knight H3, with which I'm 3-0 in tournament games. You will hopefully get paired with another player soon, Marble. Yeah, sorry about that. Your opponent, it may not have been their fault. It might have been chess.com doing something weird to them. But yeah, super annoying, and I apologize for that. All right, I'm going to open up the games from this other tournament as well. At least you beat Wesley So, right? Even if it was sort of a chess.com server issue. At least you've now beaten Wesley So. So other people won't know the details. Dissertia. Do I review the games? That's what I'm here for. I mean, if by review, like, I'm supposed to talk about these games, you know, and give some comments and ideas about what's going on. But I'm going to start by opening up a couple more. Interesting. So here, white could freely push this pawn to e4 and chooses not to. So they really, really want to be in the London, but it seems to me like the best move is certainly to play e4 when you're allowed to. I'm curious about this thumbnail here. I want to see it. It looks like it's going to be a quote from a chess player, and I'm very interested in chess player quotes. Later, I began to succeed in decisive games, perhaps because I realized a very simple truth. Not only was I worried, but also my opponent. Beautiful. Love it. Mikhail Tal. Let's open up one or two more games. We got Where's the Bread against Leviathan. And there should be one more here. Fearless Fencer against Neforlian. Excellent. Okay, now of the games I'm currently watching, there's Wesley So. Let's stop watching Wesley So. All right, let's have a look at this opening here. Knight f3, d6, d4. So black's playing the Philidor defense, defending the e5 pawn strongly. Knight d7, continuing to support e5. The downside at the moment for black is that these bishops have been blocked in very early on, right? So, that's something for black to sort of plan their game around a little bit as the further development comes in, is sort of what's our plan for these two pieces. White's having to think here themselves, trying to decide where they want some of their pieces to go. As far as the question, what is the most aggressive but sound response to the Carl Khan? Maybe the fantasy variation, as espoused by Hosta Mahogi. I've only played it once in a tournament game myself. I don't know what the Ilva attack is. Yeah, I don't know, unfortunately. to b3. That doesn't seem super aggressive to me. The pawn of Botvinnik attack is kind of aggressive, depending on how you define aggressive. But I mean, it's really trying to, you know, take over. Yeah, I saw that game, Hosta. I paid close attention. I thought you were doing great. And then you played like 6 moves I hated in a row. You can't find it anymore, Scott? Maybe it's switched from upcoming events to current events. Oh, it's not showing. That's so weird. All right, I'll give you direct links, Scott. Is your rating above or below 1600 chess.com rapid? Like, which section would you rather be in? Bishop c4, good diagonal for this bishop. That was a good choice by Rusty Spork. Because you can see black's not in a really good position to block this diagonal with pawns, right? With this pawn structure being like this. So this point's a little sensitive. And if black plays in the wrong move order, you know, you can already just crush black. So they have to be careful, play this bishop e7 move order, covering knight g5. You want the 1600 plus? There, that arena's the 1600 plus. Sure, Marble, if you want to. You can join either tournament depending which you think is better for you. There should be new games starting over time in each group because, you know, people sort of drift in at various times throughout the evening. Okay, Filet of Gefilte Fish says that maybe d takes e5 is going to be strong here. The idea is maybe to play queen d5. Let's just check. Here, here, here. I have not Sumner. Sorry, Marble, that I can't do anything about then. And if the knight goes here, takes, maybe here. Something like this, right? Wait a minute. Okay, white just played knight c3. But I thought this bishop e7 move was very safe. And now I don't see how black survives this move without losing like a pawn. Losing a pawn is not the end of the game, but for move 4 or 5, it's pretty dramatic. You think black has to play c6 in this move order here? Then what would be the answer to knight g5? Everybody has a way with words, Marble. Some people's ways are good, some people's ways are poor. Knight h6, huh? An uninspiring move. Maybe there's no disaster. C6. I never knew that move order was required here. That's a really unobvious move to find, you know, if you don't have the opening all memorized out. I mean, basically, you'd be looking which is the safe move order to develop my pieces, and now we're being told that neither is the safe order. That's a major bummer. Okay, so bishop e7 was played. White played knight c3, normal developing move, and now black plays c6. So now there isn't this queen d5 move. So d takes e5, d takes e5 looks reasonably stable for black, right? So white castles. Oh, that's a funny line, gefilte fish. Let's show that. This opening as black, doses dose? I guess the run would be really, really fast if he blunders into this queen d5 move every game. He could just play, you know, 100 games in 10 minutes and then say, well, I guess that opening wasn't good. I ran my way all the way down to 0. Aman is a Canadian grandmaster and part of the Chess Bra team. They are one of the biggest streaming channels in chess, I think. At least as far as I know. If they're not, it's because I don't know as well, not because they're not. What?
I just made a joke.
Tell me. Aww.
If that was a fail, it's okay. Do them all.
Okay, so check this out, folks. We've got a crazy variation from filet gefilte fish showing how tricky it is to get the right move order for black. So it is an e takes d4 line. Okay. E takes d4, knight takes d4, knight d7, bishop c4, bishop e7, takes, king takes, knight e6. Whew. I'll give you all a moment to process that one. Thank you, gefilte fish. Filet of. All right, here's the next link, Scotty. Oh, so you can play the Philidor with white and with black. That's cool. Get the same kind of strategic positions again and again. So the idea is for the knight to try and trap the queen, and if the king takes, there's a really dirty mating pattern with basically just a queen. It's unusual that you can pull off a mate like this without a lot more pieces. You know, it's kind of an accident of black's weak light squares here. And I suppose queen here is the better option. And then white takes, and after this has this check here. And it still looks very bad for black. If you come this way, there are checkmates. If you go back, there's knight e6 here, taking the queen instead of the rook. So, yeah, this looks pretty much dead for black after this knight e6 trap. So, if you want to play the Philidor, it's a logical opening, but you do need to be careful the first few moves about some of these tactics against f7. I believe that one of the better move orders is to play knight f6 first before trading or defending. I believe. This might be wrong or irrelevant or old-fashioned or not computer checked, but in my day we were told that this move order here was the safer move order. You attack this pawn with the idea that if white takes your pawn, you can take here. And this was considered to be okay for black. And then once white spends a tempo on knight c3, which is not, you know, bishop c4, knight g5, now black has the tempo, I believe, to defend the center like this. That's... Anyway, that was like the 1960s wisdom on this line. All right, let's get further into the game. White castles. Black goes knight f6, continuing development. They could have also thought, like, let me get going with my queenside counterplay. Part of the c6 pawn is defending a weak square in the center. Part of the c6 pawn is launching your counterplay, right? Your space that you're going to get. Black could have considered this. It's tempting fate with bishop f7 when you don't have much development, but it doesn't look like white can play bishop f7, according to my preliminary calculations, so maybe b5 is playable. In any case, black played knight f6 first, which develops a piece and means you can always castle against a threat here. And white makes a trade. Good call. Or fine call, I guess. I don't know. Let me think. I'd be tempted to play a4 to avoid b5. Typical move for white to do, sort of preventative. That's why I thought about whether or not black could play b5 last move before white gets the chance to play a4. So white trades and goes queen e2. Okay, very calm. So just developing, the rook's going to be better on the d file that white has opened, right? So the queen goes off of the file, the rook can go to the file. If black grabs space with b5, it doesn't feel as severe because the center's already opening and we can quickly play a4 from white's side here. Yeah. Okay, reasonable. Black gets castled. Is there such a thing as an isolated king pawn? Yep. If this f pawn were traded, we would call that an isolated king pawn, just like we call the isolated queen pawn an isolated queen pawn. It's not because it's like a magic special thing, the only pawn that can be isolated or something like that, right? It's just, it's one of the most common pawns to see isolated. But we call it the isolated queen pawn. It's just a descriptive name. It's not like something magical or out of lore, you know? If you have an isolated rook pawn, you can call it an isolated rook pawn, etc. In general, the trade on e5 helps black a little bit get filter fish because it opens that diagonal for this bishop, right? See, I mentioned these two bishops were struggling a little bit. DE5 frees that one on e7 at least. So it's not white's strategic desire to make this trade. Yeah. But, you know, if white thinks they've got enough with this bishop not being able to come up, black spent a move on a pawn instead of a development move, and white feels the open position is, you know, quite playable like this, okay. We'll have to hear out their case, right? Seems possible. Yeah, from a positional perspective, some people would say the pawn on c6 is good enough, and this knight on c3 is struggling to find its purpose, and everything's fine for black. I don't know the Indian opening, but in the Italian opening, there are several scenarios where you would go for a queenside attack as white. One would be if your opponent castled queenside, and the other is that there are a lot of positional variations where people play kind of the pawn structure that black had a moment ago. You know, they've got this pawn structure here as white, but their opponent's pawn is back and the bishop's out. And since they don't have a great way to take over the center, you'll see them play the same plan I talked about, b5, a5, just grabbing space where they can. That's one of the most popular plans in the Italian now at a grandmaster level. Okay, so white was threatening knight takes e5 here based on the hidden attack between the rook and queen. Black wouldn't really want to recapture and lose the queen. So queen c7 is played. That keeps the pawn nice and defended. This could be next. So white has to either keep piling on some pressure or at some point play this preventative move a4, I think. That's some biting prose, summoner. It sounds like Tarash's ideological successor from one generation after Tarash. Sounds like Tarasha's chess child. H3. Okay, so a slow move from white, merely keeping black's knight and bishop from occupying g4, allowing this piece to develop here safely at some point. But, I mean, we're inviting this whole plan from black of b5, a5, knight c5. So we'll see if black goes for it. Hey, Blood Queen. Nice to see you. Oh, this quote is actually from a book called Chess Generalship. Is this the only game happening? No, not at all, Blind Bandit. There are like 8 games happening. I was just starting off with a focus. I like to focus. Something about me. And I have a bias in favor of monotasking and focus. So you'll always hear me advocating for those things and saying, oh, this seems like the right kind of time for focus. And, oh, I feel like monotasking might be better and so forth. And I'm sure there are times where multitasking and a lack of focus are advantageous. And I may miss some of those times because I'm not skilled in those ways. I'm sorry for the mouse slip, Gabriel. That is an unfortunate way for a game to go. Very unfortunate. And Marble, I can't interpret that question about the only way forward from the King's Indian opening be a timely A3. The King's Indian opening, like most openings, has many options, as we see, a la brioche, going for this queenside expansion here, and it looks nice for them. I think that black has a very good opening, personally, from anything I can tell here. Very nice opening for black. Because actually, okay, so in chess, normally people talk about bringing out the pieces, right? Versus making too many pawn moves. But when I look at these white pieces and then these black pawns, I feel like the white pieces have basically nowhere to go. And so they're kind of in bad relation to these oncoming pawns. Like, you can't even back off. You can't get out, right? So we're looking at moves like a3, bishop a2, knight b1 kind of moves for white. It's very, very constricting. Who wrote that book, Summoner? It's definitely strong writing. B5. Okay, and white's still thinking here about which way to go, because they're just, maybe it's now dawning on them that it's hard to figure out how to sort out your pieces against this kind of pawn structure. I remember many games when I was anywhere from 1500 to 2300 where I would feel like I was bringing out my pieces and my opponent was playing little fiddly pawn moves, and at some point my position was bad even though it should be good. I'm failing to express this properly, but like, you feel like you've played the right moves and nothing you did you could point at and say that was wrong, or I wasn't sure about that. You did all the right things. You brought out all your pieces. They fiddled around with some pawns. Everything should work for you. Like, you should be able to sacrifice or take or knight g5, and nothing works. And it just seems like a violation of chess justice and chess principles, and like the whole world is wrong. That would happen to me a lot, and I didn't understand how scenarios could turn off of one little slip here or there, and there wasn't just one way to play chess. Do I like bishops on g2 or g7? They're fine, Ash. I don't think I have a strong bias for or against those bishops on the long diagonals. Sometimes I play those openings. You know, Catalan, Reti, King's Indian Defense. And often I don't. Yeah. I don't think I have a heavy pro or anti-bias on those bishops. All right, bishop came to b3. A la brioche. Brings the knight to c5. So black can take that bishop pair at will, but there may also be a specific immediate threat of b4. Knight b1, knight takes e4. Possibly winning a pawn. So something for Rusty Spork to assess, like to what extent is b4 a threat. If b4 is a tremendous threat, you might find yourself even playing a3, allowing this thing, which you might not be pumped about, giving up the bishop pair in this structure here. You might much rather give up the bishop pair in this structure, but you may have to respect that after b4, knight b1, knight e4, you're lost or something, you know? So this is a weighty moment for the Spork. Fair, Mars Robinson. A bishop on the long diagonal like that can later on turn out to be great. But I personally take a more active role in it than just something thawing on the counter that I've forgotten about. I feel like there are conditions on a board that favor or disfavor the long diagonal bishops or fianchettoed bishops. And so I have to actively steer the game towards a position that will be good for my bishop. He won't just become good by luck or by chance for me. Marble, you could type out the full name, King's Indian Defense, instead of just typing in kid. All right, so knight c5 comes in. Let me see if I would defend this pawn or not. Let's ask ourselves the tough question along with Rusty Spork. We may as well, right? For those of us who are not fighting ourselves, we may as well try and fight through one question here. Ah. Okay. I think I found a natural way to play for white that doesn't sort of fall into this b4 move. So I don't think we need to play a3 to stop b4. Or, I mean, not to stop it, but to deal with it. And I'm doing fine acratic, you know. Not particularly up or down today, just a normal day. So here's my thought. Bishop g5. I mean, the question is, do I have to play a3 or can I keep developing my pieces, right? So let's see if I can keep developing my pieces. Bishop e3 looks like it's very, very likely to hang my pawn, so I'm not going to look at it too hard. Let's look at bishop g5. If black chases the bishop around, it makes the position more messy and double-edged, and black has to then defend e5. So I'm not really worried about that so much. Let's just double-check b4. I'll show you my idea. As Stamen says, there are some interesting tactics, right? So here's what I was thinking. b4, trying to go after my pawn, I play knight a4. Simple as you like. And now, if I've blundered into b4, the refutation is going to be one of these knights taking on e4. That's how I could lose my pawn, right? Knight a4 may or may not be a playable move for black, but it certainly doesn't win my e-pawn, and the same for knight b3, right? So let's first look at black taking on e4. My idea is to trade, basically. So let's say this knight goes here. I simply trade on f6, undefending the knight on e4, so black needs to recapture with that knight, not with the bishop or the pawn. And then I take on e5. Specifically with my queen, because I want to trade queens. I'm attacking the queen and the bishop potentially, so black might not have a lot of choice other than to trade queen. The rook is preventing bishop d6. And the point of trying to trade the queens is so I get this extra tickle on the pawn on c6 when my knight comes to e5. Because I still, even though I got my pawn back, I need to make up for the fact that I gave black the bishop pair. I need to have a little bit of a tickle here, right? I need to bother my opponent a little bit, some kind of pressure somewhere. Some ability to get this knight off of the rim. So, yeah, c5, c4 is definitely scary, for sure. That's why I want to be doing something. You see what I mean, Blood Queen? Like, the reason I'm trying to threaten or push or bother black with something here, the reason I'm insisting on the importance of queen e5 is that if I sit around, the knight here could become a problem. So I want to be bothering black. By trading queens, I'm also removing a piece that's helping black control c5 and c4. Right? And I'm also sort of showing that white still has a tiny development lead by trading the queen. The queen often provides a lot of defensive glue. So you normally hear people saying, like, oh, when you're up in development, you want queens on the board to launch a better attack. But often in master level games, you'll see people trade the opponent's queen because of its great defensive nimbleness. It'll often be the piece that's kind of gluing the opponent's position together, and you trade it, you can get sort of a positional initiative where you continue to make significant threats and try to ruin your opponent's structure or win a pawn at some point in the position after the queen trade. So I'm going to trade the queen. Now, I'm less in danger of this pawn coming through because there isn't the queen there. But most importantly, I'm bothering the opponent so they can't take the time to simply set up c4 or to go bishop a6, b5, and somehow overwhelm the knight before I can deal with it. So, yeah, basically at this point, you'll notice that white has some bits of pressure against these two squares. If black goes bishop d7, I'm probably going to react quickly with c3 or a3 to get this knight into better position and maybe open up the c file so I can fight for c5 and c6 squares more. Absolutely, Summoner, they're delightful. And do tell us who wrote it. And then I had this thought, if black plays c5 to get out of the fire of knight c6, you can play knight c6 anyway, and this bishop's not really going anywhere, right? So they do something like this, and you take it, and you take it, and we. Yeah, I was wondering about that too, Filet Gefilte Fish. Let's check that. I was wondering, can we do knight d7 here? If knight takes, rook takes, woohoo. We just showed that our rook was developed before the opponent's. If they go rook d8, then maybe, well, first of all, maybe knight e5 they have to repeat. But also maybe Gefilte Fish is thinking we could just come into c5 here. I don't know if I should trade first or just come into c5. This looks good enough. Oh yeah, this looks good enough. So the idea is, if black takes here, I don't recapture on d7, I take here. And now it's just oopsie tactics. Exactly, if I traded first, I had to worry about b2, but also what I was checking is, if I don't trade, am I allowing black like a strong way to trade on d7 or c5? And then I realized, no, I'm not. If they retreat the bishop, I can now throw in the check, right, like this. And then maybe come to the e-file here. Yeah, and if black takes here, of course, white's comfortable. Now there's no bad knight stuck anywhere on the side of the board. We got rid of the bishop pair of the opponent. Everything is clean and smooth for white. In fact, that's an amazing square for the knight. So maybe knight d7 would also be a decent move here for white. Okay. The other branch was this knight takes here. Right? And then I was just going to do some more basic trading. Takes, takes, takes. This knight's undefended if the queen takes, so the knight has to take. And again, I just come here. And again, I'm purposely trading queens, folks, just to highlight the fact that my rook's on this open file first. It's removing some of the glue around black's position. So when we get this trade, we're just bothering black a little bit because there's not a queen tucked on c7 defending that square. We have rook d6 coming. Here, white is probably actively better. Black should be able to draw because the bishop's good in such endgames. They should be able to sack a pawn and develop the bishop and be fine. But white is more than fine. Well, Ivan, it depends on, or Yvonne, it depends on the situation, right? Like we just had somebody come into Twitch a moment ago and they asked this question, which I didn't address immediately because you'll see in a moment. How do I improve from 2000 online in every time control to national master? What reasonable answer can I give this person, Yvonne, right? In 2 minutes or 3 minutes in between doing other things, right? Because I'm already doing a certain show, right? I'm analyzing a game between a la brioche and a rusty spork. So what am I supposed, like, what proper answer can I give this person, right? Like, one thing I could tell them is we've compiled all our, or a great portion of our advice and ideas into the Dojo training program so Juju could go check out the Dojo training program, right? And then there would be a whole task list that breaks down, 50 things that they need to do to go up 100 points. And they're going to have to do that probably 3 times at least to make it to National Master, right? So I think it's probably partly a question of like situation, Yvonne. Like a lot of chess coaches are now being asked questions offhand in a situation where somebody's expecting a 10-second answer. And what can you say in 10 seconds, Like Kraai said, you have to improve in every facet of your game by about 300 or 400 points. That's also sort of true, but also sort of, only mildly helpful, right? Like what you said, like think more, study more, etc., right? What kind of specific advices do you think someone could give? I mean, to get somebody from 2000 online to 2200 OTB, let's say 300 to 400 points of improvement, you would need dozens and dozens of private lessons with them, right? Where you would go over lots of specifics. So I feel like I could give a good answer myself, but it would take me a lot of time, right? I can't do it in between sentences of a stream. All right, let's see what Rusty Spork decided here, yeah? A3. Stopping B4, right? And there goes knight B3, CB3, bishop E6. Immediately targeting the weakness. Laser focus from the brioche. B4 to keep it alive. Oh, and the bishop comes into the weak squares. And this is the first step in conquering the open D file, right? Because we're taking control of D1, so this rook will never be able to rejoin that guy. Ay. Position's very, very pleasant for the black pieces. I mean, look, white's queen is almost trapped here just off of light squares. Do you see how powerful black's position is? Outrageous. And even if we escape, black can maybe already win a pawn off of this. And that's just, one line of forcing moves. Of course, a major problem for white is the idea of black just doubling rooks while white is being prevented from countering. That quote from Frederick the Great makes sense. What precautions do I take while playing higher rated opponent? No particular precautions. I just play chess. I mean, in a sense, I'm taking the same precautions as in any other game, right? I mean, I'm thinking hard, I'm focusing, I'm looking for my opponent's ideas, I'm watching out for traps, I'm double checking calculations, etc. Like everywhere. Juju, I haven't been doing Juju, I haven't been doing private coaching for a while, but I'm open to the idea of doing a couple lessons now and then in the future at some point. Mainly what I'm thinking of is doing lessons for folks in the dojo community who are on a plateau. So helping people break out of plateaus with 1 or 2 lessons. I don't want to do, hundreds of weekly lessons with the same student for a long period of time. That's not my current taste right now. Let's see. Has Brioche decided yet? Not yet. Okay. So here's the situation for black. So one option, which you could calculate at length, would be bishop c4 to d3, seeing if you can just pick this pawn. The other option is you try to keep improving your position, because when you win that pawn, you kind of wake up all the white pieces, right? If they win back their pawn, your advantage will be mostly gone. So you'll have burned your energy or your advantage too soon. Oh, Trey's been sticking with the dojo curriculum and skills and rating, making lots of progress. Wow. Well, that's nice, Trey. That's nice. Happy to hear that for you. Happy to hear that for you. So the other option, let's talk, what's the option other than going after the pawn? One option is a5, trading this pawn and opening up the a file a little bit and making the c pawn less weak. That's certainly a possibility, because white has this idea of going rook here at some point and trying to pressure the structure a little bit. Another option is you double rooks here, but where are we going with it, right? There's no penetration point yet. I guess once we double the rooks, then we would go for bishop c4, d3 or something. Then we'd start trying to go after that square. Maybe a5, and then after they take, you put your queen on a5. What this will allow you is some bishop takes a3 tactics in some cases, or a b4 idea, and then a takes b4, queen takes a1. Meanwhile, you can still double the rooks. You don't have the weird rook off on a5. Yeah, this is probably a plausible option for black. This a5 move. That's a pretty reasonable precaution, Ash. Good against any opponent, right? To be sure that you're having a good day, that you're mentally and physically, you could say, mentally and physically fit and focused. Oh, Yvonne, you're saying somebody pays for a real lesson and there's plenty of time and only get generic stuff. Yeah, that's pretty weak sauce. So there comes, so black goes for doubling the rooks. And white goes for putting the rook on this open file and saying, hey, you know, are you worried about knight takes b5? Right? Can you double rooks if I have this move? So just a little something to worry about for black. Yeah. Logical. So black might want to play a6 or queen b7, something that defends this pawn here. Or bishop c4, blocking the file. That works too. Sounds fun, blind bandit. Is that realocratic? That's pretty funny. There's a great kids book also that's called like The Most Boring Book. And it talks about how it doesn't have any pictures and it's all white with a little bit of black text on it. Black's still thinking here. Stamen saying another idea for black would be knight d for white would be knight d2, tempo over here, and then try and break with f4. So Sumner, main strategic factors, black's ability to take control of their d file thanks to their light squared control. And some slight counterplay for white possible on the c file that black has to figure out how to deal with concretely. And of course the bishop pair advantage, if the dust clears into various simplified positions, there will be some advantage for black in a lot of endgames. You know, sometimes Sumner, it becomes a bunch of little specific details. It's not always huge plans, but like, you know, if white could somehow harass this bishop with the knights and trade off black's bishop pair, that would be a goal for white to do if they ever get that opportunity, right? If white could somehow block this bishop, that would be good, but that ship kind of sailed when white played b4 just a couple moves ago, right? Right where white played a3, black trades and then hits this light square pawn, and this pawn's already on a3, and this one advanced because white didn't want to repurpose the queen to defend it. Probably they should have. But honestly, even with queen c2, we're never blocking this bishop's diagonal, right? We're just defending the square, plus there's a pawn on it, so we're pretty tied down to that. Yeah, the light squares kind of collapse at that point. Hard for white to regain them. So it's largely a question of what progress will black be able to make. And what opportunities does white have to defend themselves, you know? Can they at some point reclaim these light squares temporarily with knight d2, force black out? Now, question about white playing f4. Hard for me to see. Right now, white doesn't control f4. In general, even if you did control f4, it would leave you with an isolated pawn. So I think I might just be patient with my position here as white. Just accept that it's not so good. So Ash Black played a Philidor defense. Like so. And white brought the bishop out to c4, which is good. But they either didn't know or underestimate or didn't see how to stop this idea behind c6 to at some point expand. Right, so What you see is they play a slow move here, and black takes the chance to play b5, and maybe white should have really played a4 last move instead of h3, as I was mentioning in the live commentary at that point. So black takes over like this, and suddenly white's losing the bishop pair. Both these pieces are kind of, as you would say, dim versus the c6, b5 pawn structure. There's like no advantage for white anywhere. And that brings us to this situation. Queen comes to c2 with the idea of maybe b3, bishop e6, b3, bishop e6, knight takes b5. So black still has to take precautions against that. Against b3, there will be bishop d3 maybe. So white won't have time to play knight b5 immediately. So I think black could just double rooks on the d file here if they want to just hold on to their position, let white make more weaknesses. I do also approve of this idea. a5, pawn takes, queen here. Definitely a fan of that approach. It gets our queen off of this file. The rooks can still double. Yeah, it's good. The more I've thought about it, the more I'm convinced that a5 is a nice thing to throw in for white. There is bishop d3, and we could take the e-pawn. I haven't calculated a Kraai. I just was suspicious of opening up these pieces here. So I really didn't look at it much. Even though it wins a pawn. I said it was an option, and that the players should calculate it, and then I didn't. I took a pass. Now that I put it on the board, finally, doesn't look amazing for black. I mean, for white. I mean, it looks like white's down the pawn for nothing. Maybe we have to try this. Bishop f4, so on bishop f3, we have an in-between move. Hopefully black doesn't have a better in-between move. I didn't calculate this. Whew! I got lucky. I just got lucky there, folks. That was like 100% luck. I didn't plan any of that. Bishop f4. So I was thinking bishop f4, they'd take. I'd take. And now I'm down a pawn, but you can see black's got like 3 different pawns that I could bother. This might still be within the margin of something I can hold. Knight e5 is a huge threat. Maybe black just stops the threat. Knight d4. Ooh. Bishop f6, covering all the knight's hops. Stop your hops. I know I'm not the only one who sometimes thinks of the opponent's knights and says, just stop your hops. Will you stop hibbity-hoppeting? This looks good for black with bishop f6. White's comp is a little bit rough because there's pressure against all these pawns over here. In other words, black has these weak pawns, which is like our compensation for being down a pawn. But I'm getting the feeling now, just as my brain slowly processes probably some subconscious calculations and some feeling about the position, that in any scenario where we win one of these pawns, like this is going to collapse actually, and we'll still be kind of busted. Because it's going to take at least 2 white pieces, maybe 3 to win one of these pawns, right? And then who's going to be covering b2? Or are we going to attack those pawns and then take time to play b3 and a4? There will still be something on b4 to attack. So I just don't see it anymore. I think white's in big trouble here. Even with this line that was semi-amazing. Bishop a7, for example, we'll just lose to bishop f3 and we lose piece. Maybe bishop c5, trading 2 heavy pieces. Takes, forced-ish, takes. Maybe taking is obliging on black's part. Yeah, that's no good for black. Let's try throwing in bishop d5, huh? And then, like, here. We leave white with this not very good piece. This guy stays good. Black's up a pawn. -1. Evaluation is so important to practice Socratic. It's a personal weakness of mine that I'm aware of, and there's a paucity of materials to use to work on it. You know, like finally Perelstein came out with that book, Evaluate Like a GM, and I know it's aimed at kind of a maybe 1600 to 2000 level, but I gobbled it up because that's what I need, you know, like, and I'm not, I'm nowhere near a 2400 level at that. So, critical moment in chess is not about critical moments, it's about evaluation. I think my number one problem when I'm playing is just not knowing how to evaluate the positions that I'm calculating. So it's about a mix of things, including evaluating. That makes sense. I mean, white's still bad here as well. So maybe black should just take the pawn. What do I know? Bishop d3 played, queen d3, queen b3, and black took it. A la brioche. It was a critical decision. See how much time... Well, they played the moves relatively quickly, actually. Black did. 30 to 60 seconds on this choice, on each move, to just go in and take the pawn. I think it's safe for black, but I doubt that a la brioche calculated, you know, a quarter of those variations we just went over. This would have been something that I would call kind of a critical choice or a critical moment here to go for this pawn. So I would have taken more time. But I am maybe more hesitant and less confident in my calculations now than these folks here are. Huh. Look who I found skulking about. So good. White doesn't have like millions of great things to do. Knight e4, bishop e4, and then various bishop moves is kind of the critical test here. Yeah, knight takes b5. The bishop would recapture. And then I don't see anything further for white there. You can also look at knight d5, rook d5, queen d5, c d5. Oops. Knight d5. Knight d5. Holy guacamole. I'm sorry to hear that, Scott. That is not fun. Knight d5? I mean, maybe black would be good with an exchange sack, but it's certainly... It's at least controversial, right? It's at least controversial. Maybe even rook a7. So are there any other options for black? This didn't look amazing, but I didn't look at it too hard. I guess this is good enough for white. And these pawns aren't amazing, and white's already recovered the pawn they were down. So if anyone's better, it's white. We could also maybe start with rook takes, hitting the knight. I don't know. So then there's some queen moves, right? We got to be careful where we go with the queen, because we could lose this piece, right? So the queen's got two directions she could go. So let's start with this one. Takes. Now, if rook takes, rook here does not look promising. So queen takes. And this could be the same with queen d8, knight takes, queen takes, right? And then rook takes c6. So the game goes on, but white is a little bit back in the game. And white has made a move, so let's go see what white played. Knight e4. Knight d5! Ooh. Rusty Spork sending shockwaves into a la Brioche's computer. So, now Brioche is going to be saying, has said to themselves, oops, didn't see that. Maybe I should have thought longer on my last two moves. And this becomes a very important moment here, because as you guys just saw from that calculation, Black's position is not bad after knight d5. It's not bad. There are variations that look pretty interesting. The key thing is Black needs to recover from that shock. And this is an important thing, a very, very important skill to have in chess. It's not an X's and O's skill, right? It's the kind of thing, I think it was Marble who was asking earlier about, like, what if somebody's rated 1500 and they're studying an hour every day and they never go up to 1600 or 1550 or whatever, right? What's going on? There's a good chance that it's some kind of decision-making, psychological personality kind of thing that needs to be worked on, not a normal X's and O's thing. That would be covered in, standard chess books and chess lessons, or something that you would sort of pick up on your own, because you need somebody to sort of break you down psychologically and get you past it. So dealing with surprises, unpleasant. Any surprise in chess, honestly, is unpleasant pretty much, right? To have missed a move that your opponent can play is always kind of like a mild to medium to severe unpleasantness. Recovering from it is a very, very important skill. Very important. And the basic of it is kind of accepting everything that led up to this moment as water under the bridge and letting go of it and taking the position as a new game. But there's another very, very important point about it, and I learned this from a book which I think is excellent called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. And he says you have to recognize when you're surprised. Now, I don't know how much of this is like his teaching versus stuff that I've thought of over the years, because I've been teaching this idea from his book for so long, right? So he may or may not say exactly what I'm going to say, but he either said this or he led me down this path. You have to recognize when you're surprised that surprise must be rooted in some kind of misapprehension or misunderstanding of the position or situation you were in before. Okay? You didn't see your opponent's move coming because there's something about the position before they moved that you weren't properly understanding, that you didn't see correctly. Therefore, you need to reorient yourself. You need to not keep going with what you thought was going on. You need to figure out, what do I not see about this position? What do I not understand about this position? What do I need to do to get back into understanding this position? And so it follows from that a really good thing to do when you've been surprised in a game, if you have the time, is to take a really short break. Now, you might feel like you're under pressure. Oh, my clock's ticking. Oh, I'm in trouble. Like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But something that breaks you briefly from the old you to like a new set of eyes, a new you playing that position can be useful. And it can be as simple as looking away from the board, taking a sip of water, and coming back to it. That would be a very, very quick version of it. What I used to do in tournaments is when I would be surprised, I would actually sometimes get up, stroll around the room, and come back to my seat. Particularly in my younger years when I had a lot more time on the clock because I played faster. And so I would use that time to make a break from the old me that had been under some false understanding to a new me who was going to look at it with new eyes. And that's a very good technique. And I'm certain that the following explanation or analogy comes from Waitskin's book. He says, well, now I don't know if this is something he witnessed or an imaginary story, but he says, somebody is like stepping into the street when a bicyclist kind of swerves around them, narrowly missing them. This pedestrian now chooses to get upset at the bicyclist. And so she's crossing the street this way. The bicyclist swerves around her. She turns this way and starts yelling angry things at the bicyclist and continues to cross the street and then gets hit by a car, right? Instead of reevaluating the situation, instead of realizing, oh, I might have messed up, that's why this surprising bicycle swerve thing happened. Maybe the bicycle was in the wrong, right? But maybe she was in the wrong, right? Maybe she didn't notice that she was crossing on a red light, right? And if you don't take that moment to be like, whoa, where did this surprise come from? What am I not understanding about my position? Then, things can get worse and worse and worse. And mistakes often come in multiples in chess games, right? So, a la Brioche, great job. They spent 8.5 minutes here. So they really out with the old, in with the new, took a break, tried to reorient, and they are going for this dramatic exchange sacrifice. Woo! Excitement. White plays queen d5 quickly. It's the only consequent. You might be slightly surprised by rook d5, but you played knight d5. Your only consequent move is to recapture. This was the plan. You go for it. You'll deal with the position as it comes after it. You don't always stop. And certainly White had calculated knight d5, rook d5, queen d5, at least this much before playing knight d5, right? Okay. Some questions from chat. Josh Waitskin, he is an international master, I think, but he was like a super, super talented junior player who may have won some national elementary or junior high championships, something like that. And he was the subject of the book and movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. He then went on to become a world champion in Tai Chi and wrote a book called The Art of Learning after realizing that what he was good at wasn't chess or Tai Chi. What he was good at was learning. And it's a really excellent book about learning. I've never met him, but I think because through reading that book, I have a high opinion of him. Let me put it that way. Without ever meeting him, I have a high opinion of him through this book, which I thought was a good book. Then the question from Mikkel Wold, have I ever crossed paths with Spassky? Yes, once. He came to the Mechanics Institute and gave a lesson about rook and pawn endgames. It was excellent. Spassky's not famous as a rook and pawn endgame person, but often what we're famous for is not necessarily an accurate portrait of what we're really into or what we're actually even good at. So it was a great lesson about rook endgames that he gave. And I think it was the Mechanics chess team from the U.S. Chess League, essentially, that was invited to that class. So it was like a small group of 6 or 8 Bay Area players. And as Socratic points out, semi-obviously, right? But with the humor of how it's not obvious to others. Turns out, if you're the world champion, you're probably good at everything. And that's absolutely correct. You know, like Tal's famous for sacrifices, but I'm sure he would outplay us in rook endgames, right? Okay, so black's got the bishop hanging, the pawn hanging, and plays this move bishop d6, which is what we had predicted many moves ago, that would be the follow-up if black played the exchange sacrifice. And here, white can go rook d7, rook c6, or rook a7. 3 serious candidate moves, probably worthy of a minute's reflection for Brioche. Basically, rook c6 says the c file is the most precious thing, right? Rook d7 says tempo plus the 7th rank is the most precious thing, right? Keeping pressure on this piece. And rook takes a7 says, heck, like I've got to move my rook anyway, I might as well eat. You know, material's material. Very, very different, right? This move is going to give your opponent the c file. This move is going to keep the c file, but it's going to give up the 7th rank for any pressure you had there, right? So very, very big differences between these moves, and it's one of those moments where chess principles are going to clash with each other, right? Like, it's good to take your opponent's pieces, it's good to take the open file, it's good to take the 7th rank, and choosing can be difficult. So what do folks think? I think it's a good one to throw at you all. Not an easy one. What do you think? Who wants rook d7, rook c6, or rook a7? What do you value? The pawn, the file, the 7th rank, the pressure on the bishop on d6, which is mildly loose, I would say. That's right, Summoner. Famous military surprise. Filet gefilte fish, this is the live game position, yeah. Any moves beyond here are just me tootling around. So bishop d6 is the last move played in the game. White's thinking. You can see both players are making pretty good use of their time overall throughout this game. Very professional, or very experienced and serious time usage from white and black. I love how you guys are answering this question seriously. That's great. You're really engaged in this battle along with Rusty Spork and Brioche. You know, if this were in a chess book, then you would basically, in a puzzle book, right? Then you would basically know, oh, the answer is never the greedy materialist move. This is an example that teaches us, you know, the value of the open file or something like that. But this is just a real position from a real game, and we don't have that kind of clarity, so to speak, about guessing what the person asking the question wants from us, right? So this is just like real life. You have to make these decisions in your games. How important is the 7th rank in this position, asks MPK. That's a good line of questioning, right? What are we going to do with the 7th rank if it's not to go eat this pawn, right? Sometimes it would be pressure sideways against the black king, but we can't double the second rook on c7 to go after f7. So what use is it to be on the 7th rank? Good question, MPK. You have to some extent, answer that yourself, right? But that's definitely a good line of questioning. We already have a 3-on-2 majority on the queen side. But oddly, as Socratic says, even if we take the a-pawn, we don't really see how our passed pawns are getting running. Yes, Blind Bandit, that's an important detail. Blind Bandit saying, if we go rook a7, giving up the file, and the opponent goes rook c8, and this is also a line that Socratic's been thinking about for a while, then we can play rook to c1, so we haven't truly conceded the file, right? All right, so also, unlike in a chess problem set or whatever, I don't have an answer key for you. I haven't computer checked this position or anything, right? I just ran into it along with you all. As far as I can tell, there's no reason not to take this pawn, so I would actually take it. I would play the material move here. So we take a pawn. For me, it's also a tempo move because a rook trade improves white's position a lot, right? A rook trade will dramatically improve white's position, so we expect their rook to run away. In that sense, this is almost the most tempo-y move of the three, right? The other three moves, keep pressure on black's bishop and thus this pawn, but they don't make a clear threat. This move threatens to take the rook. And if they come here, rook c1, we threaten to take the rook. And it's completely lost for black to trade off their rook on a7 or on c1. Completely lost. So, essentially, they're going to have to just walk away with this piece. And it's still a long fight to be had in this game for white because, as Socratic noticed, it's not so obvious where we make a passed pawn to further break black. And as somebody else was asking, sorry, I'm not familiar enough with their name to remember it, MPK219, right, was saying, what do we do with the 7th rank, right? We don't have rook c1 to c7 coming in. It's not super easy to pursue white's advantage here, but this is the best we can do. And after 4.5 minutes, congrats to Rusty Spork on really taking this move seriously. They did grab the pawn, which is what I would do. One idea I had in mind, rook d8 got played, not rook e8. One idea I had in mind for white was to play bishop c5, just trying to force a trade and then win back a pawn on e5 for one of my doubled b pawns. That was one of my main ideas looking at this position. But takes, comes with tempo on my rook, and the bishop pair is amazing. If we don't immediately win the e5 pawn, we're going to regret giving up the bishop pair, right? We need something really certain here. Even e4, knight here, b4. You can start to feel, for those of you who don't know this, rooks hate bishop pairs because they just can't disengage and operate in peace as long as there's a bishop pair on the board. So, this is unpleasant for white, this kind of idea. So, the second idea I had against rook e8 or rook d8 was to maybe just play knight g5 and just reduce a little bit of clutter, even though it's not amazing. Basically, by going after f7, we're just going to trade a piece, right? And there's still heavy work ahead of us. Heavy work. I can't promise anybody that we're going to win this game. But it's about as good as we can get here, I think. Often truocratic. I don't know if it's true more than half the time or more than 90% of the time, but it's certainly often true that a bishop pair can keep up with a rook and a knight in the endgame. If I exchange sack back, which bishop would I go for? Either way, I won't have a good position, so I'm not doing it, Blind Bandit. No exchange sacking back. No, I'm just going to have to move back and forth a really long time in that kind of endgame. Be very patient. That's the truth of it. Okay, so here we are. Ash is wondering if maybe white has rook d1 as a move here. Perhaps. I'm also noticing this idea of bishop b6 to c7, but bishop b6, rook c8, and now we don't have rook c1 anymore, and we don't have bishop c7, so it doesn't 100% work out there. Rook d1 is plausible. I suppose since this pawn's hanging, black would play here. And then I'm not exactly sure what we do next then, huh? Yeah. Probably none of us are. Same thing on rook c1, you know, black can just play here. It's very hard for us to get any control of the light squares and break black's, you know, structure here in the center, which is really blocking our second rook out of the game. And oddly, the one rook isn't enough to fully crack it. Bishop b6 played. So maybe white sees something that we didn't yet see, right? But rook c8 seems almost necessary to prevent bishop c7. There could also be some position where you pin the bishop, but it's hard to imagine, right? Like, it's hard to imagine this trick working for black when they've got the back rank. I feel like by definition, if your rook's on the second rank, it's not on the first rank. What do you think? You guys with me on that one? Unless you're playing, what was that, quantum chess? Quantum chess, where you sort of like split the rook and your opponent has to take a measurement to know whether your rook's on the 7th rank or the 8th rank. Okay, still thinking is à la brioche. I mean, I feel like rook c8 is the only move, but I don't know yet what white's plan is there, which is slightly worrisome. You know, you like to know what your opponent's up to. Because on the surface, this move actually looks bad for white in that, you know, black can actually take the file from us and we might never get it back. It is the worst piece blind banded, yeah. I was thinking in this position of playing either knight g5 or knight d2 blind banded. Right, knight d2 trying to trade the bad knight. Yep. Yeah, I mean, those were my main candidate moves, Stamen. Knight d2, knight g5. Trade the piece that's not so good. If things were going better for me and I were more fancy, you know, I might try and look at something like this, you know. Trying to do some kind of weird tactic. But I don't really believe it here, so I didn't look at it too much. I agree, filet gefilte fish. As usual on Friday Night Fights, we've got quite a high-quality game before us. For those of you who watch regularly, people play really well on Friday Night Fights, don't they? Jesse, who's suspicious of people's ability to concentrate deeply while on a computer, should check out some of these games. I feel like people acquit themselves quite well. You want to get this knight all the way to a5. That would be nice, Mars Robinson, because I'm really struggling to deal with these squares, you know. Honestly, almost more than trading the knight, I wish I could put my knight on d2 and just keep my opponent's bishop out of these squares. But, yeah. No move yet. No move yet. Black under 10 minutes. They're going to have to speed up a little bit now, a la Brioche. Rusty Spork is still fine. You know, the time was very close until one move ago, but suddenly a la Brioche under 10 minutes. Rusty Spork almost 18. It's a pretty big difference. We're starting to feel it as we get down that Brioche does not have a lot of reserves yet to absorb surprises or critical moments, any kind of like explosion of tactics briefly. And one of Jesse's contentions, right, Stamen, is that people don't use all their time in the online games. He thinks when people play their online games, they don't use their time as well as when they play in OTB games. But I find, you know, sometimes we're watching games from players rated 600 and they use basically 95% of their time, like perfectly. They just keep a little bit of reserve, like at the very end. They've got just enough. You know, some of them play like their old hands at chess tournaments, basically, even though they're not even going to chess tournaments. When do we start getting kings in? Yeah, so Blind Bandit, right now it's impractical for white, right? So by necessity, we can see that white needs to trade pieces before they get their king in. Yeah, I mean, I think we all have some bias based on our own experience, right? Like, Jesse's experience is that he doesn't concentrate well on his computer. But that doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't concentrate well, right? My experience is I concentrate just fine on my computer, but that doesn't mean everybody else can. But I think I was like a little more open to acknowledging that Jesse has a different experience than me. Okay, I've got an idea for white here, folks. Finally, something came to me. For Rusty Spork, how about rook d7? Trying to force a rook off with rook d8. We're using a lot of energy. It's kind of clunky. So it might slightly reduce some of the advantage we think we have here as white, but it might be the most that we actually have, and it might slowly steer the game in the right direction. So, like, it allows black to get their king out first. So you could see something like this happen, right? Even such fancy tactics, I mean, they're not clear at all because our king is just out of it, right? And black's coming after this, and where are we ever winning the game? We don't have a true candidate passed pawn here. So it's not... It's not certain that this idea is winning, but it's hard for black to stop rook d8, at least, right? And we seem to be preventing rook c2. Maybe we should double check. Knight e5 hitting this guy. There's no way black's got the kind of counterplay they need for this. Yeah. So we stop anything aggressive from black on the open file with their rook c8 if we go for this rook d7 move. So maybe we just have to, you know, calmly come back, and black does this if they want to, and you know, maybe like f6, knight d2. It's a slog, all right, for white to make progress. But maybe eventually they'll be able to get the rook out, you know? Rook c1, bishop here. It's going to be hard to get. We might have to sack the b pawn at some point to go after this, but I don't know that we're going to win enough back. Black will want to strengthen this side as much as they can. It's not easy, right? This king's amazing. The bishop pair is strong, and there's no file for the rook. I'm not sure white could win this kind of an endgame here technically. Nevertheless, I'm not sure I've got any real idea other than rook d7. Let's go fresh eyes and see if we see anything else here. Okay, it's so much better to trade this rook because this one's already good. So if we just say, okay, oops, bishop e3, and then here, this endgame here, I feel like it just has to be winning for white eventually. See, the black king can't centralize so easily. This rook's amazing and can harry all the pawns from behind. I think this is just straight up cold winning. B3, A4 is eventually a plan. Yeah, blind bandit. Eventually a plan. Part of the problem with just playing it out of the blue is that in many cases, black could sort of attack these pawns. And this pawn's also attacked at the moment, right? So let's say I go h6. You play a4, takes, takes, takes. So now you have a passed pawn. Oh, sorry. You have to be even more careful before you can claim you have a passed pawn, I guess. I go here. Ay. Now my rook's just gasping to this bishop pair. I mean, maybe black goes and just takes both of these pawns before we can really use them. Good night, gefilte fish. Welcome. See you next time. So b3, a4, blind bandit. It makes sense. We just have to really control the position before we can do this. There's a couple of things that can go wrong with b3, a4, right? One is bishop c2 going after this pawn. Another is this pawn hanging when we play a4. Another would be like rook c3. So we have to do this when when black doesn't have anything good enough against it at some point. Definitely it's one of our very few ways to advance the position with a pawn trade, which would improve our rooks. And one of our few ways to maybe make a passed pawn. So it's one of the most important ideas for white in the position, b3, a4. For sure. I guess I'd been considering it at various points without mentioning it. And I was just always seeing some, complication or attack or counterattack, something that was not sitting right with me. Yeah. The thing is, in this current position, blind bandit, do you feel like after rook c8, right? Do you feel how... And look, white just spent like 8 minutes on this move, so black is caught up on the clock here. Just after rook c8. Do you see here how a lot of the black pieces feel better placed than the white pieces, right? So like the knight f3, some people have complained about what are we doing with the knight f3. Rook e1's not so good. Right, bishop b6 kind of random as well. Only rook a7 is well placed of the white pieces, really. And black's bishop is quite nice, plus it has options. Knight is pretty decent, and rook is great. So when your opponent's pieces are better placed than yours at the moment, then these kind of ideas are often mistimed. Often you have to first do some improving of your pieces. And so b3, a4 is like your idea 20 moves down the road, when you've neutralized all these little advantages black has, like, bishop e3, knight d2, trade the knight, rook c1, oppose the rook, push it away, and I was even playing f3, king f2, as you may have seen in one of my long lines, still waiting to go b3, a4, but that was still maybe how I would eventually do it. See this, remember this line here maybe? Around here, I'm getting ready for b3, a4. but I was just trying to have everything as close as I could first. But then I was starting to think, like, okay, let's say I played this for black. I was thinking that if I go here, they go here. And I was thinking maybe I play b3 as a sack and go after the h-pawn. But you see it's not so easy. And then I thought, okay, I could play like b3 first. But then they go bishop c2, and I know this pawn is dead. So you would maybe play a4 at this point. Takes, takes, takes. Our rook breathes aside. We've got a passed pawn. But again, we did have to sacrifice a pawn, right? So now what we have is rook against bishop plus a nice passed pawn. Our king is still being held out of the game. And black's position is relatively strong, and the bishop pair makes the bishop that's facing the rook stronger. Rooks, as I said, struggle against bishop pairs. So white's advantage here has been, held in check a little bit, I would say. I mean, maybe white somehow can win this position, right? But we can feel that it's not super easy, I think. If black had time to expand this pawn all the way to h4, I'd be really pessimistic for white. Right now, like, white's chances for me are largely around attacking that h-pawn. It's ideas like h4, and if they take, we come here. And if they play h6, I want to go here. And then at some point, like h5, rook h7, and kind of play on the h-file. Because with just the b pawn, I don't see how to crack black's position with our king out of play. Yeah. Okay, white must have made a move by now. They have, and it was rook to d7. Okay. I mean, they're basically playing all the moves that an international master can think of. Which I, have no interest in tooting my horn or anything, or saying anything like calling myself the internet's chess teacher or anything like that. But, reasonably for them to come up with all the moves that someone 900 or 1,000 points higher can think of, has got to be like somewhat of a good sign for them at some level. Yeah, so I believe black needs to concede the rook trade and simply prepare to centralize the king and strengthen the position overall, and not let the second rook ever get into the game. Always have bishop c4 ready. Now, the b3 pawn sack is going to be better if our king's still on the first rank. Like if I go here, 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 and somehow don't play king f7. Rook here, 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 here. If white could somehow get a situation like this, that might make the b3 pawn sack really good. Problem is, like, even here, black could just avoid the bishop trade, which makes sense. They could also bring their king up even now. The king's ready to come up. Plus, I was just wasting time with h5. So really, black should be playing moves like king f7, rook here, bishop here, right? And bringing the king here quickly. Yeah. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. So I looked at one version of bishop to f8 earlier, blind bandit. What I looked at was rook c2 with the idea of check, bishop f8. And then what I found was that knight e5 hitting the bishop, bishop c4, or any other move to save the bishop, knight d7, and white's winning. So I think the problem is, f6 has just been played. I think the problem is that any version of bishop f8 with the timing that we have here is going to allow knight e5. They don't have time for f6 and avoiding the rook trade. So f6 was played, which makes sense. Now the sensible move for white is going to be rook d8, trading the rook, right? So black's going to trade it, and now they're going to bring the king up. and try and keep the c-file closed. Oh, we've got a very, very tight endgame in the works here, folks. White has a full extra exchange. Normally, you would just write it off as technically winning if we were GMs, and then we'd say, well, we're not. We don't know how to play this out. But if we were GMs, my position would be winning, we would say as White. But honestly, I mean, even if White were an IM, I don't really have an idea how to win this position as White. It looks very, very close. They're getting a bit low on time, but they've got the 30-second increment. It's somewhat reasonable. It's going to be a bit difficult. But I wouldn't say they've mishandled their time, really. I think they've done a pretty good job of using the 45 minutes they had. Like they could have played much faster. I would have said, oh, that's too fast. If they'd played much slower, I would have probably said it's a little bit too slow. I think they're doing pretty good here. Get to c1 and then pick dark square bishop. So just having fun. The key point is that when the white rook goes to c1, black's going to block that file with bishop c4. And we don't yet see a clear way for white to make progress against that. Ash says black has the center. Destroy the center. Well, we'd love to, right? That's like your opponent's got, a queen, 2 rooks, and a pawn around my king. Well, destroy their queen, 2 rooks, and a pawn. Love to, but where your opponent's strong, you can't always counter. Any piece trade helps white, Samarth. Any piece trade would simplify the situation here, the knight trade or the bishop trade, but especially a bishop trade. Because if you can break up black's bishop pair, your rook's got a much easier time playing the game. So like we've done a variation where white brought the bishop all the way back to e3 and traded a knight with knight d2, and I still wasn't sure that white could win this endgame. But if you trade off the bishops, I guarantee I could win for white. Okay, king f7 was a little more precise for brioche, right? You want to head up. You don't need to gain a tempo on this bishop because the bishop's already badly placed. It wants to come back somewhere better, right? It's not doing anything against f6. So you should just mind your business and head to the best square with your king. Now I would say important to play bishop c4 because otherwise white's going to play rook c6 or bishop c7, either of which is very good. So it's got to be bishop c4, but brioche is thinking here. That's a strange moment to hesitate. Of course, there's got to be some limits to these players' skills. There have to be some situations that they're not comfortable in. Bishop c4, nice move. There's got to be something like, instincts on on the positional priorities in an exchange down endgame. There's got to be some territory of chess where they don't have all the answers. Otherwise, they would be at least 2200. Franklin Knowles Young. A series of many books. Is it a series of books about military history or about chess, Interesting. I found a historical article about the guy. Looks like he was a chess player. Okay, we've got an idea here. Knight h4 to f5 from Blind Bandit. Maybe that's a weak spot. You can make some use of the knight, poke this piece, and maybe even knight e3 at some point and do all this. I will say this, Blind Bandit, as the knight heads towards f5, black should definitely have time to play d4 to keep the knight off e3. d4 is a generally likely and desirable move for black at some point. I guess with knight h4, one big question is, can black play g6? Can you go f3, kick the knight, and just win this? Seems you can. Seems you can, although there might be some complication. Knight here threatening knight e2. As well as g5 trapping this piece. King f2. g5, king here. Check. Okay, that's not good. I see what you mean, Stamen. Right. So Stamen is saying, like in this kind of end game that I set up at some point. Where did I have such a line? No. That's not the right one. Something like this, Stamen, right? You're saying in these kind of positions to play b3 and f3. No, you're thinking a position with still knights on the board. Sorry. By the way, bishop c4, bishop b6 was played, trying to return to e3. And black played d4, shutting the bishop into the black position. Exciting, right? Now this piece can't get back. And what I was going to say, Stamen, about your idea to try and force f3 and b3 was, I think if black proactively plays the move d4 in many cases, you won't have the squares you need for your rook along the third rank to do the full maneuver you were talking about. And I may be missing some details of what you're seeing as possible, but that was my concern, was that d4 would take away this rook e3 square. But the rook comes back to e1, poking the knight. And if the knight retreats, this move could trade dark squared bishops. That could be a big, big deal. So this d4 may have been too abrupt. Notice what I wanted to do with black was put the king on e6. If my king were on e6, then I could answer this move with king d5, and I just completely would not care, right? Yes, MPK, it's always an option to go b3, takes, and then use the file. Big, big option for white here that they could have considered. Right, would have been to do this, and then maybe rook here. And again, if black's king is on e6, this is all less of a big deal, because the king can go to d5 and d7 and kind of push white out. But here, yeah, black's got to take a move defending this. White can maybe make some trades. And it's not clear what happens. On the one hand, you've given back a pawn, so white's material advantage is quite small. But on the other hand, the rook has gotten loose, you know, and becomes a strong piece. Okay, in the game, rook e1, black played bishop d5. Blind Bandit asking, could we just push here, here? The knight could take it. So no. Black could not just push the d pawn here. Played bishop d5. So bishop d5 versus moving the knight somewhere. Oh, the knight's got like nowhere to go either, huh? So it's really f5 or bishop d5. Man, I really wanted the king here. Rook d1. f5. Bring your king, my man. Oh, no. Oh, no. This is very loose move from black. f5 here. Just as a model of military art. Yeah, sounds really interesting. So here, for example, white could play bishop c5. White could actually also centralize their king because the bishop's off this diagonal. Well, black is just, they're playing these loose moves. The advantage would be to have the king here to protect all these squares. Then you can just dominate even though you're down in exchange. But here you're leaving openings for moves like knight takes d4, bishop c5. Not especially that move. Yeah, I mean, can we take on d4 was a very good question here. I didn't see how it quite worked to take on d4, but here's what I thought worked. Bishop c5. And takes, boom. And suddenly, black can't keep both these files closed against our rook. The knight's got a decent square on d3. There's knight d7. Tactics to watch out for. This pawn's a little bit loose to knight f3 as well. This looks lost for black. Tell me more about your question, Dabo. Why isn't music played in what situation? I see it's got you really incredulous. But tell me about the situation in which you expect music. In chess tournaments? Knight f6. Awesome. Far Eastern and TCal just finishing up their game, which we can tell at a basic level means that they spent 2 hours playing, so it was epic and good use of their time. Oh, music is a nice sound while streaming. Okay, so for me, why am I not playing music? But Dabo, you've been here every week. You know I don't have music playing on my stream. Why do you sound so shocked tonight? I can explain why I don't put music on during my streams. I spend my streams talking. Therefore, controversial move from white f4. Whoa. Excitement. I spend my streams talking, so I don't really use music because it could clash a little bit with my talking, right? Wow, dramatic f4. Rusty Spork saving a couple extra minutes on the clock, making a tough decision reasonably quickly here. So if black takes on f4, white recovers the pawn here. But what's dramatic is that black could also trade a piece here, right? And then it is a pawn sack, but it almost feels like white wins pawns by pawn sacking. Now we've got a pass pawn instead of this useless majority, and this is isolated. All right, I won't read Edward Winter's review then, Summoner. If I get a chance, maybe I'll go straight to the original. Good question, just having fun. Maybe some people, what they're saying is not as important. That's what I'm saying. I don't know, just having fun. Like a lot of streams, people are playing games, right? And while you're playing a game that's not too serious, like a blitz game or a rapid game, maybe it can be nice to have like a fun vibe and you're listening to music. And those people may talk in between here and there, but there's also like periods of time where they're just like vibing with their music, so to speak. And I've occasionally streamed myself playing blitz chess, and during those streams I've occasionally listened to music. I'm not wholly against it, but I think that if my stream is more like a chess lesson, it's mostly just distracting to have music at the same time. All right, we get a trade. And e4. Yes, that's correct, a la brioche. That's correct. So white gets this beautiful bishop trade that they wanted, and they fix their pawn structure and get a passed pawn. But the game is still in doubt because these pawns are so powerful here. Right, and here we're doing classical chess, right? So it's even more thoughtful than rapid in a way. So these pawns are going to keep this king at bay. Knight f1, opening the attack. Not a lot of choices for black there. Actually, there is one choice. You could play e3. And if rook d4, you have e2. What does white do against e3? Knight g3 covering that square. And then the d pawn must fall. Okay, so d3 probably correct. Knight comes to this hoppity-hop blockading square. Black plays bishop b3. I don't know how well they've calculated knight f5 check. Hard to know who or what's going to win or happen here. Okay, I guess knight f5 check, king e6, knight g7 check, king f7, and black wins. So white shouldn't take this pawn. They want to move the rook, perhaps not here or here. So where do they want to move the rook? Like most likely is rook d2. And now I see why black played this bishop b3 move. Not only does white have to worry about the pawn's queening square, but it stops b4. So after a move like rook d2, this pawn remains isolated for now. And black can dream of capturing it. Knight d4 wins, points out Merles. Oh my god, that's very deadly. Bishop b3. White hasn't moved yet. Check here would be the end of the game. Immediate. Oh la la. Will white go for knight f5? Ay, ay, ay. That might be a big problem for black, that knight f5 check. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. So I really feel like this endgame was unclear. Like, even if we play g6 and white says, aha, I got your bishop. I mean, is this clear? There's no open file for the rook, right? And this strength in the middle is so huge. And the king's better placed, partly because of that strength in the middle. For some reason, I'm thinking little in the middle, but she got much back. But this is not at all little in the middle. This is like huge in the middle here from black. So I think this endgame was still like, it was completely unclear who was better. Now bishop b3 gets played. White goes rook f1. I feel like knight f5, that might have broken black. That might have broken black. That might have been the moment for white to take over this endgame. They played rook f1, keeping this pawn defended and this square under wraps, and black has a chance to defend the pawn, and they choose not to. They just go for this pawn. But take your time. Defend your stuff. Right, so Dabo, you want me to listen to Simon and Garfunkel, huh? What's the idea? Classical or folk, or call him something or other. Okay, Merle says now that knight f5 is not check. Relax, David. There's only 4 minutes on the clock, but relax. Calculate a little something. Knight f5 is no longer check. You go d2. I guess they go knight e3. King c6. I mean, it might still be anyone's game if white can't properly approach and catch this pawn. Here. Here. I mean, for all I know, black's even maybe still winning this with e3 here. Knight d1. Doesn't feel like you're ever going to win with that move, does it? But looks can be deceiving. Maybe that would do it. Hey, ZJ. Okay, so knight f5 was now played. Holy moly. g6. The knight just heads back with a full free belly. What? Bishop c4, would that sow discord here? Oh, yeah, that keeps the white king at bay. Love it, Blind Bandit. I guess we also have that move if white ever plays king e2. So in theory, black could also just do something like this here, huh? And if king e2, then bishop c4 is good. So who knows what's going on, but g6, oh, feeble, right? White snacks your pawn, and then you just send them back to the beautiful blockading square. Yeah, that's not going to do it. That's not enough. You know, Summoner, my first chess coach made me read a book of military strategy early on in my chess career. So I feel like Franklin Knowles Young might have been in that direction, trying to apply the principles back and forth between military and chess, and I don't think he would be the only one to see that connection. Okay, black gets a pawn back. I mean, still an exciting game, I guess. White chess is supposed to be like war. I guess, Blind Bandit, there's some... White's going to bring the king to d2 here. Throws the check first. Okay, so the rook gets uppity. But if black plays king d4, is this the moment to get behind? Is this the moment to get behind? They're going pretty well, casual player. This one has kept us occupied. We have not strayed to any of the other games yet. But I hear from some of the other games as they're ending that people are talking together and that they've had really, really long games. So it sounds like everybody's got a good match today, you know? There are definitely differences between chess and war, that's for sure. But like even Nimzovich, you know, thought of some of this stuff in kind of militaristic terms, right? There's flanking in chess and in war. There's definitely a bunch of parallels, right? Like you're trying to control position and... No, I think there's definitely some parallels as well as obvious differences. Because of the arbitrary condition in chess of how you win, you know, sacrificing is probably more of a thing in chess than in real life, right? In war, when you're sacrificing, you're just having people die. And in chess, you know, you automatically win because you get the king. But like the kind of victories that we think are the most beautiful on a chessboard are things that you wouldn't do in war. They wouldn't be worth it. I don't know who's winning casual player. That's part of the excitement of this particular game is we don't know who's better. White says this is my chance to get behind. To be clear, White had another major option back here, which was king e1, king here, getting in front of the pawn and trying to hold this blockade. Now, could black have broken through? I got this far, and I didn't see for sure that black breaks through. I also don't see how white necessarily ever makes progress if both of these pieces just need to stop e3 forever. Be that as it may, white chose to try for the rook behind. Black blocks the file, and white has a choice between rook d8 and knight d5. I think rook d8 is probably correct. White plays rook d8. Yes, Blind Bandit, you can play chess starting with different amounts of stuff. When I play with much weaker players, for example, I like to start with less pieces. It's just called playing with odds. And I like to take enough pieces off the board that it's unclear who's going to win the game. I think it's more dramatic in chess. I think it's one of the important pieces of drama in chess is not knowing who's going to win. So like when I play my kids, I use 1 knight and 1 bishop and 8 pawns. But they start with both my rooks, my queen, and one of my knights and bishops. So that way it's a close game. King here, unpinning, I guess. But now the white king gets this amazing e3 square. This should be completely winning for white. Wow. So knight d5 didn't really work or something? That's a good point also from ZJ. Kind of getting at a similar thing as what I was saying, where like you could make a million sacrifices and quote unquote win, but it would basically never be worth it in the real world, in a war situation, right? But also, as ZJ says, in chess, it's like you win, you lose, or you draw. In war, often you both lose, right? Yeah, it's very, very different in that sense. All right, bishop drops back. Now, the simplest plan to me is g4, f5. I don't see any counterplay for black now that this king is holding both of these pawns. So you just push this thing and clean it up. Man, so it hinged on this knight d5 move. And then here, and that was that. Huh. So white was right to go for rook c8. Against this move, there would have also been check. And then let's say knight d5, king e2. And black can't take on e3. Yeah. So star maneuver from white. Rook c1, rook c8, rook d8. You know, scary as this pawn was. And g4, here comes that f pawn. For a moment, I thought it was like tempting, like, you know, let's fix this pawn. Let's go b3, b4, something. But, you know, the king's in this area. It doesn't really do much to move this pawn for us. Let's make a passed pawn that these pieces are going to have a hard time dealing with. That's fundamentally how you win endgames, right? You make a passed pawn that the opponent then has trouble dealing with. King c5 was fatal, giving e3 square to white. Exactly. The moment this king appeared on e3, for the first moment in the game, I had certainty, right, about who's winning and how and why, right? So here we go. White plays g4, king c4. There's really nothing to stop this f pawn. And this king's not really fishing for anything over on b3. It just kind of doesn't matter. Plus white has rook c8 if they want to keep the king leashed. All right. We've received a raid from Grandmaster Min Lee. And I highly recommend his channel, folks. So let me give him a shout out. Hopefully this will give you... Oh, wait, no, I have to do shout out, right? Let's see. There you go. Now you have a link where you can follow Min. So go ahead and click on that, folks. Min is an excellent, excellent chess player. Very, very strong grandmaster. Very strong blitz player. Very strong OTB classical player. Very strong bullet player. And above all, very strong person. He's just absolutely lovely. So click on that follow button. So this game has ended here. White pushed the pawn. Black put the bishop on d5 to try and cover this square. White pushes the pawn anyway, preparing rook d5, king d5, f7, f8, right? Just can't be stopped. And no strong like his chess strength. I've never seen him bench press. I don't know anything about that. Thoughts on the news with Spassky. Jesse says we're going to record a podcast in his honor. I think Spassky was a great guy and a great chess player, just like what I just said about Min, except I don't know Spassky as well personally, maybe, but I'm not, a terrific chess historian or anything, but everything I know about him was positive. So I think he was a great guy, and it's, sad that he died, sad that anybody dies to some extent. Well, I mean, maybe one or two exceptions, but, but it happens, unfortunately. My feeling, casual player, and congratulations to A Rusty Spork and A La Brioche for this epic game that we enjoyed watching. My feeling is that if Rook C8, Rook D8 was getting there in time, Bishop D5 instead of Knight D5 would not have changed the result at this point. White gets behind the pawn. The king and knight are close enough to blockade this pawn here. And I think eventually black loses. White has the immediate threat of Rook D6 or idea G4, G5. I think it's all going to fall apart here. So you can also play Rook F8 first if you want. I thought of that move as well, Santo. I mean, Spassky, yeah, I think he had a great life probably, right? 88, world chess champion. Got to spend a lot of his life playing a game that he enjoyed. Had the respect and love of his community. That's what we do, Blind Bandit. We move on to another game now. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, Fibbits, if it's too much stress, if you didn't enjoy that, then you might want to reconsider chess, because this was a very enjoyable game. Like, this is the kind of game you should be able to enjoy from either side. So if you didn't enjoy it, you should definitely wonder a little bit about whether or not you want to be playing chess and in what formats and when and so forth, That's not a very good headline, ZJ, but I have generally very low low expectations from that source that you mentioned. All right, so now what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to go to the 1600 plus group and find a game from them. Or are all their games already done? No, we've got one going. Oh no, these guys are done and they're just playing a blitz game now. Nope. Not for me. Wow, looks like all the games might be done at the moment unless I'm seeing this wrong. Everybody's just finished at the same time within the same minute or two? Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and they're on to... These folks are just straight on to other rapid games. Can I look at the draw? Bonne nuit. Merci pour la bonne journée. Quoi? préfères que je dorme? Quoi? Je comprends pas, t'es dans le noir. Just a second. I can't understand the sign language in the dark. Sign language, I think, requires light. All right, I'm back. Hey, casual player. You're welcome. Catch you later. Samarth is still waiting for an opponent in the 1600 plus section. All right, so if there's someone in the 1600 plus section still looking for a game or wanting a game, we got Samarth waiting for you. And so I'm being asked to maybe look at a game between Fearless Fencer and Nephorolian. So I have to go to one of the players' game histories, click on a game. All right, let's go to the beginning of the game and make sure the screen capture is still lined up. Yeah. Hey, Enrico. If you want to play with Samarth, this would be the arena that Samarth is in, I think. Okay, let's have a look at this one. Exchange Queen's Gambit. Classical development of the pieces up to here. Pawn structure. Each player has a foothold in the center. Pieces out on decent squares. Now, in this position, I feel like this is our first move. All right. Good night, Santos said. Good choice to go to bed when you need to go to bed. This is the first unobvious move here. Black decides to seize space on the queen side. Sort of standard options are developing this bishop to g4, developing this knight to d7, or there's this trick where somehow you play knight e4 to trade pieces. Like maybe even right here, knight e4, with the idea of bishop e7, queen e7 defending e4. Or if they take, you can take here. If they take here, you take here, hitting these pieces. If they take the pawn, they lose the bishop. If they take the bishop, they still lose. So, ZJ, this was a pretty classical this is a pretty classical Queen's Gambit exchange variation. Yeah. Yes, that is the origin of the name, ZJ. It's a fun sounding name, right? But it's also just really standard and descriptive. When I suggest names for things, Kostya often says, that sounds boring. I like to just call things what they are, I guess. But, I mean, it would also be nice if there's some some zip or some pizzazz or an alliteration or a rhyme or something, I mean, I'm all for it. Okay, but maybe on knight e4, bishop f4 avoids some of those trades. I don't know. I feel like there are some positions. I don't know exactly when this move or this move is right. Oh, you can also sometimes go knight h5 so the bishop can't escape the trade, you see? So you go knight here and then they trade and you take and castles and you just come back having traded a piece. No. No, I did not, Leviathan. I only looked at one game so far tonight. Okay, so let's see Fearless Fencer's concept. Lashing out on the queen side, grabbing some space, kicking that knight, and then developing the c8 bishop, which is often a slightly problem piece for white's really good bishop on d3. Very, very logical. There's just one downside, the c file, right? c6 and c5 I would expect to be very weak in the aftermath of this sequence with the forced trade. Let's see what white thinks of it. They make a trade over on this side of the board in order to hop into that square. Right, so the trade on f6 was to get control of this square here, c5, in front of the c-pawn, which makes sense. However, I think the knight's not very good on a6. I would be tempted to just... I don't know. Whoops, sorry, the bishop's already on f6. I'd be tempted to just sort of do this, 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 and start attacking this. No, then I allow rook c8. Hang on. Okay, what if I play rook c1, preparing bishop takes a6? And if they take, I take. Bring my queen to a decent square. And now the knight is stuck defending this. The problem with knight c5 is it blocks our own attack against the pawn. This might be a case where we just want to start attacking it instead of carefully blockading it first. That's correct, ZJ. Definitely. Okay. So white gets the square with the knight. Black offers the trade. White goes for the rook to pressure the pawn. b3 is good positionally, keeping this pawn from here, covering this square in case of knight b6. And yeah, white recognizes, let's just move the knight back so we can actually attack here. So... yeah, so I think knight c5 was a waste by white. But now they're on the plan, going after that c-pawn. Black manages to defend it, and white looks to sort of up the pressure somehow. Why is this classical and rated? That's just what it is, Enrico. It's an online game that's rated on an online chess server. So yeah, white has trouble cranking up the pressure more here. Knight on a4 can't attack this. We can go into c5. Maybe the knight should have just traded because it's not that good on a4. You see what I mean? Maybe it should have just traded itself. And then your rook could go here and also attack a5. An important question is, can black boot us out? And the answer is hardly never. Hardly ever. Ever never. Never never. So we can keep the pressure on black here with a second pawn we're attacking. Yes, yes, yes. This bishop has to prevent knight e5, so it can't move. So black's pretty frozen here. And then we have to find a way to crank up the pressure even a little bit more. But I feel like it might be possible. This feels more promising to me than the knight on a4. A little bit closer to pressure from white in this line. So in the game, the knight went back to a4. And then I feel like black seems to be hanging on. White tries to crank things up with e4, which makes perfect sense. Black clings to the c-pawn, as they have to. Queen d3 bothering. Strengthening slightly. Oh, black forces a piece trade. But does white have knight b6 at the end? They do. Yikes. Black cuts off the king. And they're not even going to recapture. They're going for a wild attacking idea. Oh, Lord. Idea queen h2, queen h1. Wow. My instinct says there's no way this works. But, it has to be calculated. So one thing white could do, potentially, is play g3 and keep the queen out. And just say, yeah, your bishop's still hanging here. There's queen d5, I guess. That didn't quite work. So I think simpler is going to be rook takes d2, queen h2, queen h3 covering h1, and not too much else to say at the end of that. So white, with an hour on the clock here, needed to spend longer on this queen d2 move. Then queen h2 came in, and now there's not queen h3. I mean, you have to say this is like the move that wins or loses me the game right here, right? Look at all these candidates. You want to be sure you play the right one at this point. You could spend 60 minutes on this move to win the game if that's what it takes. Yeah, black played this as a sack on purpose, Far Eastern, with the plan of then queen h2 to h1 checkmate, because white doesn't have an obvious way to block this file. And here, the only move they found to avoid checkmate was f3, and it's a check by perpetual. I suppose you could do this, and you've got enough pieces to beat the queen, but it's still a perpetual. Why not play f4 here? f4 check, here, check. g3, check, here, check. Yeah. Seems like white's winning. Seems like white's winning. The rook's covering the queen tie, so if this is the position where you're thinking of rook e3, I actually don't think I blundered it into it in this particular position. Yeah, so really, I mean, the critical moment for white right here, you have to just calculate a forced win. You have to find your way out of it. Take all the time. Take all the time you need. I mean, I would guess that to some extent, no vest for the jury, higher rated players, regardless of their temperament, have learned when to stop and force themselves to spend time on some critical moments in their games, I think. There may be more higher rated players who by temperament are better at doing that, but I'm sure there are some people who have, blitzy temperaments, but because they cared enough about it, they learned to use their time. just like I believe there are trends of certain characteristics are more common among strong players, but I also find such variety among the masters that I've met that I think there's room for quite a variety of temperaments as good chess players. Wasn't this whole thing a bit drastic for black? Why not just go down one exchange? Yes, this was very drastic from black. So another option here would have been to, in this position, play something like rook b8, knight takes, rook takes, and just play down an exchange. I think sounds good, Summoner. Summoner, it was a pleasure. I wish you a good rest of your day. I think that perhaps some of what we saw as kind of desperation from black was because this is a position where an exchange is somewhat easier to convert because it's very clear what we're trying to do with our rooks. Right? Like you defend the c pawn, I put my queen on e4, and the pawn just dies now that we're down in exchange. So basically you can't stop white from just taking your pawn on c6. Then they're threatening like back rank mates. They've got the passed d pawn. The bishop's just shooting into thin air as a single bishop. So this position, I know we just spent 2 hours looking at an exchange down position that was strangely close to equal. But this one here looks like a walk in the park for white. So I think that can kind of push you into kind of desperation when you think that... And black ultimately made the right choice in this game as well, folks. I mean, bear that in mind. Like, our question just now wasn't this whole thing drastic for black? Why not just go down the exchange? If black had simply gone down the exchange like this, what are black's odds of not losing this game? Truly, they're super slim, folks. Right? Like, this is already a position that I win 100% against Magnus Carlsen, maybe even against Stockfish. Like, it's very paint by numbers for white, right? And then the thing black did, and this is a thing that distinguishes people, right? Having the sense of when things are desperate, when you can, like, up the difficulty level, right? And white didn't lose from here, but black drew. Black drew, right? That they got half a point out of this position. I mean, that exceeds all expectations after knight b6, right? You would not expect to get half a point anymore. So it was actually like a good call. And there are some people who are better or worse at sensing like when they should go for a desperation versus when they should just, make it as long as possible. Like sometimes you make like a couple difficult moves for your opponent, or sometimes you make a lot of easy moves for the opponent, and you have to make that choice, right? Do I string it out, or do I like bring it to a head? What's going to be harder for my opponent? You have to kind of read their mind, read their body language if it's OTB, read their time usage. And like some people just have a feel for what is going to be the harder problems for their opponents to solve. And then you see certain people who just have a higher percentage of, what do we call it? Like sort of like swindles or miracle saves, right? So black showed us a little bit of that here in this game, I think. Okay, now we've got a request from Leviathan that we take a quick look at their game. And we've got a question from Fibbits, who is very stressed out getting into time pressure with our epic feature game today. And Fibbits, you know that you can go look at the video on demand and watch 2 hours of all of us talking about your game at some point, right? And get some feedback on your game from that. How do I deal with freezing up in critical moments and spending too much time? Basically, critical moments are when I want to spend my time. So I don't have a maximum time to spend on critical moments. I have a maximum time to spend on non-critical moments in order to try and save more time for critical moments. And I only freeze up if I run out of time and start panicking. But usually that only happens also if I've got a bad position. If I've got a good position, I can usually find some way to keep playing happily. So I think it's probably something from my past a little bit, maybe. Yeah, and Danya has a very, very good sense of that, ZJ. Now, of course, you have to calibrate that to the time that people have, right? In classical, you can't do exactly the same things, but there's classical chess versions of when do you need to change the course of the game. This is like the main thing Danya taught me once when I had a lesson with him specifically about how to play blitz chess better, was like recognizing when you need to change the trend of the game, when the game is getting like too easy for your opponent, just going straight down a path where the moves are just, come to them fairly easily and the advantage is comfortable for them. And you need to switch and switch and switch. And he can force an opponent to switch kinds of advantage and to deal with different kinds of counterplay and different ideas like 4 or 5 times from a bad position. It's mind-boggling and insane how many different layers of difficulty he can and resistance he can put up for them. But there's also a classical chess version of that, So, have I ever played against Vishy Anand? Not really, Pratik. The closest I came was I organized a world/chess.com versus Vishy Anand match, and I relayed moves from chess.com for Anand. And unfortunately, the event was plagued by technical difficulties, which were very frustrating for him and for me, embarrassing for me as well as, the representative of chess.com. But he was, I think, very gracious about how unpleasant an experience it probably was for him. So at least he didn't make me feel even crummier about it. All right, so we're going to try and glance at Gaurav's game here. Close this. Go back here. Leviathan's profile. If you're asking me, no vest for the dreary, whether I go for objectively best moves or moves that give me the best dynamic winning chances depends on the position, right? That's kind of too general a question, right? In most situations, you're trying to play the best move. If they're equally good moves, I tend to play the most aggressive or dynamic or most winning chances kind of move. But if that move is worse than the best move, I don't have latitude at a master level to play bad moves too often, praying that my opponents are going to blunder or something, right? That's not really... Tie Dog Kostya plays more d4 than other moves, but he also plays e4 and knight f3 and c4. He can play anything. Jesse can play anything, but he used to play knight f3 move orders more than d4. And I can play anything, but historically I've played a bit more of e4 than of d4, c4, knight f3. So, of the three of us, Kostya probably has played d4 with the highest percentage over the course of his career. And when we were younger and weaker, we didn't have as much variety as well, Tie Dog, which is probably natural and normal, right? Like, when I started out, I didn't play as many different openings. I was like, you learn a couple and then you try some others. And so for a long time, I didn't play d4 until I was already 2300, as an example. And I'd been playing in tournaments for like six or 7 years. playing just like e4 and f4 pretty much. And then at some point I played d4. It depends how good they are, no best for the jury. You could hire somebody as good as Kostya to teach you how to play e4 and he could do it. If you're talking a 1400 who's never played e4 over the board, then I don't think an 800 should hire a 1400 who normally plays d4 to teach them e4. That a player of that level won't have a sufficient breadth of experience, right? Don't worry about being trapped, Tie Dog. You can do anything you want. I just tell you one little tidbit. The first tournament where I played d4, I had done no opening prep for it. I just hadn't prepped e4 recently and didn't remember all my variations, and I didn't want to dishonor my openings. So I went to this tournament after not playing chess for like, whatever, a school year. And not working on my openings. And I went to this tournament and I just played d4 so as not to play my old lines with e4 and make them look bad. And in my very first game with d4, I beat a grandmaster. So, and it was the first time I'd ever beaten a grandmaster. So you can play any opening you want. Don't feel trapped. So white doesn't advance d5 here, and black says, I'm going to play the Benoni anyway. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any sense. b5 is played as a pawn sack to undermine a pawn on d5. But white doesn't have a pawn on d5. So this move is not good enough. If your opponent doesn't advance d5, then the point of c5 is to trade your opponent's center pawn with your slightly less center pawn. Okay, that's the point of c5. d5 avoids it, then you can try and undermine the center that they spent time building. But if they leave the pawn on d4, the mission of your c pawn is to take that pawn. So when they leave it there, you're supposed to take it. Based on your own previous move. I don't mean based on opening theory, I mean based on logic, right? Like the pawn is here in order to whack. So it's gotta do its job. Okay, b5. Bizarre. a6. Bizarre. There are good gambits against this line as well, Leviathan. Like, the main one is to take, and play e5 if you want to play really aggressively. This is, as far as I know, invented by Garry Kasparov, e5. And then when the knight comes here, you just play d5. Takes, and develop, and castle. You could look into that, which could make sense. After e5, they can also play knight c2, and then there's a gambit where you go b5, cb, d5. So here you're saying they spent time on this knight maneuver, so now we sack a pawn and take the center. What would be a good gift to the winners, Courtney? Oh, answering their questions. I see, like a situation where the senseis answer all your questions if you win the dojo tournament or get second or third place or something. Bishop e3. I guess you're gonna go g3, bishop g2, huh? Okay. Seems fine, maybe. It feels a little awkward. Maybe knight g4 after bishop e3? Okay, you just are getting your development done and accepting that you're kind of down a pawn and you want to play like a... In the Benko, you don't care about being down a pawn, but here, I mean, you don't have quite the Benko. What about this move? or one move ago or here. If they come here, then you come here, right? And you at least get the bishop pair off of them. That seems good. That makes bishop e3 look a little dubious. That's why you put your bishop on h3 instead of g2, because you were scared about knight g4. I was like, what's this unusual, like, hyper-modern, like, development here, stopping something in the center by pressuring e6? No, you just didn't want knight g4. Okay. So, Leviathan. We are thinking that knight g4 was a real option for you for 2 moves in a row here, honestly. Here you could play knight g4, and here you could play knight g4. Bishop h3 stops that. Queen b3, takey, takey. Now I understand. No Best for the Dreary's comment right after the game ended was something about how stressful it is to nurse an extra pawn for a million years. Yeah, it's not my favorite way to win chess games either. So feeling like your opponent's always the one making threats and all you're doing is trying to stop their threats and hang on to your stupid pawn for 50 years. It's, it's somehow not the funnest form of chess, but I guess you're clinging on to it for now. Oh god, the structure. And you defend your pawn from here. Oh yeah, it's nightmarish, even though you're the one maybe winning. It's somehow like you'd almost rather have more fun and not win than have this. Does black have a draw with just bishop back and forth here? Bishop d8, bishop e7, etc.? Wait, I don't understand, ZJ. Why was somebody's friends giving you advice about their friend's opening repertoire before a game? Were those other people the kid's friends or your friends? Because seem to have betrayed that kid, huh? Fair enough, Mars Robinson. We got all kinds of different personalities. That's part of the fun, right? Which pieces do I fix when they're all broken? Okay, you trade the rook. Yeah, I think Leviathan, with this pawn structure, you should be okay here. It's a question of finding it. So what about this option? Boom. Somewhere. Boom. Is that enough to draw the game? Can we be satisfied with that approach? Or is there something you think that the opponent could do about it? Maybe rook a4 and b4? You weren't looking for a draw at all. Well, why play like this? He can play to win, and he should. Okay. Well, Merles is on your side. Merles says you're better now. White structure is trashy, but you are down a pawn. I don't know how realistic it is to try to win. Let's see what happens. Rook a1. Takes on c5. Nice. Well, now, yeah, now you're gorgeous. And here you would take back this way, preventing b4. Oh, bishop b7 was very strong. Bishop b7 was very strong. Okay, good work. Man, oh man. And after all of that, no best for the jury, after all of that bishop h3, he still got to take on e3 on you. What a nightmare. Ay, ay, ay. At least I traded pieces. But you traded off the bishop pair while busting your own structure. Why is chess so hard? All right, let's see. Is there anything better? Maybe not queen b3. Here's an unusual thought. How about knight a4? Instead of queen b3. It overprotects the c-pawn, and, you know, you could sow some chaos in black's camp with an outpost on b6. Black wants to... Your opponent is still thinking they're playing the Benko, right? Like, they're sitting here like, oh yeah, Benko, I'm going to pressure the B and A files, right? When you put a knight on b6, they're going to, like, really not know what's going on. Like, where's my pressure on the B file? And my rook on a8's got no space. And, okay, I'm assuming that queen b4, queen d2 is not a problem for you at the moment with your extra pawn. Oh, I'm hanging your knight. Okay, that's a problem. That's more of a problem. Bishop d2. Queen b5. Reasonable. Reasonable. Still a fight. Still a fight. The bishop on h3 is crap. All it's doing is stopping knight g4. It's like the saddest roll it's ever had, right? Knight e4. Somehow black's fine here too. Despite the extra pawn, despite knight a4 looking so good. No vest for the jury. It just means this bishop e3 move was super bad, right? If you then had to put the bishop on h3, and he could have played knight g4 2 moves in a row, and then your bishop sits on h3 doing nothing, right? This was just... And you saw, the moment you played bishop e3, I was like, huh, what, huh? It just went against my instinct. Like, this move had to be wrong. That must not have been it in Jesse speak. What was wrong with the super, super duper boring, obvious, blunt move here? You didn't want to not develop. Gotcha. If it's any consolation, this move is good at queening pawns really soon. Now, bishop e3 feels super wrong. No, I would agree with you that b4 is a loss of tempo in terms of development, because even if you can play bishop b2, you didn't need b4 to develop the bishop. If you had a pawn on d2, then b4 does count as a developing move, right? But with no pawn on d2, you could go bishop f4, bishop g5, bishop e3, bishop d2. So b4 is a loss of tempo, but it's to hold this pawn securely. Would the bishop be better on b2? Yes, you'd get higher quality of development at the cost of time, right? So you would lose a tempo as you were afraid, but you'd get a good quality of development here. In my opinion, this is a pretty good diagonal, right? With this f7, e6, your bishop's likely to be good on b2 forever. Plus, you don't need to worry about this knight g4 tax, right? So it's way better than e3. But in terms of g5, bishop g5 is not super amazing. It's going to tend to trade for the knight, right? Your best square for the bishop is going to be either f4 or b2. But here, bishop f4, bishop c5. But I don't see anything wrong with b4. I mean, you've got two connected passed pawns. I mean, if black plays bishop e7, I'm not even sure that you can't play a4. I mean, it wouldn't be my instinct, right? My instinct would be to play some developing move. Knight c3 would also let me play b5, you know, and it would get a piece out. Yeah, but I mean, I'm certainly tempted by a4, b5 kind of stuff, just trying to roll over the opponent. It's tempting. despite also having that fear like, oh, I'm not developing. Maybe I'm going to blunder this winning position. It's not necessarily winning. I'm going to blunder this pawn up position. Okay, so at this point where black trades on e3, black is better, as correctly recognized by Merles and Leviathan. So black goes for this trade here, wins back their pawn. And now, you know, materials basically equal. The bishop pair is great. Anybody's game. d5, kind of blocking that bishop, is not obvious to me. Is white threatening to take on c5? Maybe not yet. I mean, one thing that's logical to me is bringing the king to e7. Another is playing moves like g5 and h5, gaining space here. Another is maybe just, you know, trading one rook and then moving the bishop. Right, black's keeping a rook on the board for more excitement. I would do the same as Gaurav there. I would not trade the second rook here, even though white has sort of the A file. I'm trusting in my better minor pieces. I want more pieces with which to outplay. And this rook is about as good on this file as this one is here. So there's no strong need to trade rooks. So I agree with that choice. Bishop thinks it's improving here. But to me, this is the weakest square in white's game. I guess we got chased off that diagonal. But too late bringing the king in, huh, Gaurav? I wanted to bring the king closer sooner. You're repositioning your bishops. White's rook gets active. d4 maybe here. Bishop takes c6. Okay. Right, b3. Yeah, maybe king d7 here. But, okay, f5 makes plenty of sense, and improving the king makes sense. King e1, where's the bread, gets out of the way of d4. Expansion on the king side makes sense. All makes sense. Wow, really high quality in this phase. This trade feels a little bit unfortunate. That bishop on g2 is really not very good, right? With this pawn on e2, it can't get out, and this pawn structure is holding it back. Black seems to have a positional advantage as long as they don't trade. This seems like a mistake. Wait for it. Is there something more to this? Oh, here you lost one of your pieces. Whoa. Okay. Right. Yeah, the only reason to exchange on a4 is if you've got something immediate, right? Like rook b4, bishop e5, or bishop b4. And b3 for white stops both of these moves. So the move that I was calculating for a moment there was this, and then I couldn't... Oh, then I didn't see rook e2. Because I was looking at it from like far away. I had looked at like this, this. And even though this bishop's trapped, I still wasn't sure if this endgame was good for black. So, okay, I probably wrongly rejected that because that's actually a pretty interesting line. And then I was thinking, I don't really want to back up and allow this thing, right? It's not obvious to me what I'm doing here. So I thought maybe bishop b5, keeping the rook out of my 6th rank and threatening this square. And takes. I was looking if there's any tactic, but I didn't see it. So this looked okay to me for black. It seems like, you know, we keep our pieces pretty good. Our bishop pair is intact, and we leave this bishop on g2. So I kind of liked that. Yeah, you're saying against rook a6, this move is fine. Yeah, that may be. That might be perfectly fine, yeah. That would be fine, too. Yeah, so I think it's clear that knight e4 is in the wrong direction, Leviathan, right? Like, letting white trade their worst piece. Definitely helpful for them. Like, if you can just keep the position stable, you've basically got a winning plan of going h4 at some point, pawn takes h4, rook h8, rook h4, rook h2. Right? Or some version of that. Or just h4, pawn takes, bishop takes h2, and then bring your bishop back. And then you just have the passed g-pawn. So this is really like your biggest advantage to exploit is the positional gains you made on the king side. When you played this nice expansion f5, g5, g4, I think all of that was super strong. And then here you worried around this knight a4 move and just didn't find the right way to go here. But lots of good stuff throughout the game before that. Especially I like f5 and g5. How you played this. And I like your confidence to not have been thinking about a draw, to have like understood that you had enough compensation and play with your bishops. Yeah. Pretty good stuff. All right. That's going to be bedtime for me, I think, right? Yeah. Yeah, I get that feeling, Gaurav, that the time on the clock was starting to worry / bother you a little bit there, which I can totally understand. Yeah. All right, folks. Tomorrow morning, it'll be the Saturday Rapid Tournaments at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, as always.